The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, which I thought was strange. Nobody sends formal dinner invitations on a Tuesday. It came in a cream envelope with my name written in my mother-in-law's handwriting. That tight, controlled cursive she uses when she wants to seem elegant. Inside, a card printed on heavy stock, family celebration dinner, Saturday, 7 p.m. Dress accordingly. Dress accordingly. I turned that phrase over in my hands for a long time. I knew what it meant. I'd been married into this family for 6 years. I knew what dress accordingly meant when it came from her. My husband, Rowan, was standing at the kitchen counter when I walked in holding the card. He glanced at it and looked away too fast. That told me everything. Your mother sent me a formal invitation to dinner, I said, at her own house, that I've been to 400 times. She's just being organized, he said. Rowan. He set down his coffee. She wants to announce something about the company. His family's company, Hartwell and Sons Construction, founded by his grandfather, now run by his father, Raymond Hartwell. Rowan was supposed to be next in line. That had been the plan since before I existed in this family's story. Raymond would step down, Rowan would step up, and everything would continue in the neat Hartwell tradition of men inheriting things they hadn't built. The problem, or what they considered the problem, was me. I was a problem from the beginning. I came from nothing, specifically from a 2-bedroom apartment in Akron, Ohio, where my mother worked 2 jobs and my father had been gone since I was 9. I put myself through Ohio State on scholarships and part-time work. I graduated with a finance degree and a specific kind of hunger that people who grow up comfortable never quite develop. I moved to Chicago. I worked at a mid-size investment firm for 3 years, hated having a ceiling, and left to start my own thing when I was 26. That was 8 years ago. The Hartwells didn't know what I did now. That was entirely intentional. When Rowan and I met, I was still in the early years of building. He knew I worked in finance, knew I had my own firm, knew I was doing well. He never asked specific numbers and I never offered them. We fell in love the way people do when they're both a little guarded. Slowly, then completely. By the time I understood how much money I was actually making, we were already serious, and I was already watching how his family treated me. Margaret Hartwell, my mother-in-law, had opinions about me from the first dinner. I was too quiet, which meant I was hiding something. I was from Ohio, which she said like it explained a character flaw. I hadn't gone to a school she'd heard of in the right context. I wore the wrong shoes to their 4th of July party, and she noticed, and she made sure I knew she'd noticed. I watched her do this with a kind of detached interest, the way you watch weather. She wasn't going to stop me from marrying her son. She knew that. So instead, she cataloged me. There's a file of small humiliations to deploy when useful. Roland defended me sometimes, not always. Not when it cost him anything with his father. I understood the dynamic. I had studied it, actually, the way you study a market before you enter it. Raymond controlled the money. Margaret controlled the social architecture. Rowan wanted his inheritance and his father's approval and, separately, me. He had convinced himself these things were compatible. I had my doubts, but I loved him, so I stayed, and I kept my work separate. My firm, Crestline Capital, managed just under $800 million in private equity by the time of that Tuesday invitation. We had stakes in 11 companies across logistics, healthcare infrastructure, and commercial real estate. My personal holdings, separate from the firm, included a portfolio of properties in 4 states and a position in a regional bank that I had quietly accumulated over 3 years. My net worth as of the previous quarter was approximately $340 million. My mother-in-law thought I was a moderately successful finance person who had married above my station. I had let her think that. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the kind of November evening in Lake Forest, Illinois, where the big houses look like they belong on Christmas cards and the cold feels like it has manners. I wore a dress I'd owned for 2 years. Simple, dark navy, nothing that announced anything. I drove myself. Rowan had gone ahead to help his father's setup, which was another thing that told me something. The house was full when I arrived. Both of Rowan's sisters were there with their husbands and his younger brother Spencer, who was 24 and had never held a job for longer than 8 months. His aunt and uncle had driven in from Milwaukee. There were cousins I recognized and some I didn't. It felt less like a family dinner and more like a gathering of shareholders. Margaret greeted me at the door with the smile she used for people she was tolerating. "Naomi, so glad you could make it." As if I'd had a choice, as if this weren't my own family. I smiled back. "Of course, thank you for having me." She had already turned away. Dinner was a long table, formal, with place cards. I found mine at the far end, nearest the kitchen. Rowan was seated next to his father at the other end. Between us, his sisters, their husbands, Spencer, the Milwaukee relatives. I was physically separated from my husband at a family dinner by careful placement, and everyone at the table understood what that meant, and no one was going to say it out loud. I sat down and unfolded my napkin and decided to pay attention. The dinner itself was choreographed. Margaret had hired servers, which they sometimes did for important occasions. The wine was a 2019 Napa Cabernet that Raymond announced by winery and vintage, which was something he did. The first course was butternut squash soup with a swirl of creme fraiche. I ate it and watched. The announcement came with the main course. Raymond stood, tapped his glass, and said what he'd been building toward. He was stepping back from day-to-day operations at Hartwell and Sons. There would be a restructuring, and then he said the thing he'd brought us all here to say. He was transferring operational leadership not to Rowan but to Spencer. The roomed at the thing rooms do when something expected but officially unsayable finally gets said out loud. A brief silence, then murmurs of congratulation. Rowan's expression didn't move, which meant he'd known and was managing his face, or he was in shock and managing his face, or he was in shock and managing his face. Either way, he was managing his face. I looked at Spencer, who was 24, who had dropped out of 2 graduate programs, who once told me with complete confidence that I probably didn't understand options trading. He was grinning with the specific pleasure of a person who has won something he didn't earn. Margaret was watching me. I understand now that this was the point. The announcement about Spencer, that was for everyone. But the dinner invitation, the place card at the wrong end of the table, the watching, that was specifically for me. This was the opening move in something she'd been planning. I found out the rest after dessert. Rowan's older sister, Bridget, came to sit next to me while others were having coffee in the living room. Bridget had always been coolly pleasant with me, the way people are when they've decided to tolerate you on behalf of someone they love. She leaned close and said, in the tone of someone delivering information they find distasteful, "Mom and Dad are restructuring the trust." I waited. Rowan's shares being placed in a family management structure, it won't be his to access directly, not while… She paused. "Not under current circumstances." "Current circumstances, my marriage." "The attorney has already drafted the amendment," she said. "They're doing it Monday." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked back to her family. I sat there for a moment with my coffee cup. The house was warm, and there were voices, and someone had put on low music. It looked, from the outside, like a family having a nice evening. I had been handed, quietly, across a dessert plate, an ultimatum. Get out of the marriage, or Rowan loses access to his inheritance. And the dinner, the seating, the announcement about Spencer, all of it had been designed to show me what I was up against, how little I mattered to them, how easy it would be to make me disappear from this family's story. That was their read. I drove home alone. Rowan texted that he'd be a while, that he and his father needed to talk. I said, of course. I went to my home office, which Rowan knew as the room where I did work stuff, and I sat at my desk and I thought for a while. Then I opened my laptop and I looked at some things. Hartwell and Sons Construction had been doing business in Northern Illinois for 40 years. Their primary assets included equipment, contracts, and 4 commercial properties in the Chicago metro area. They had also, 3 years ago, taken out a significant line of credit to finance expansion into a Wisconsin residential development project that had since stalled. That project, Millbrook Estates, a 200-unit development outside Madison, had been financed through a consortium of lenders. Crestline Capital, my firm, was one of those lenders. We held a position in the senior secured debt, which I had taken because the underlying land was solid and I expected either a successful build-out or a clean foreclosure. I had not told Rowan this. I had not told anyone in his family. I looked at the loan documents for a long time. Then I pulled up the personal property records for the Hartwell family home in Lake Forest, the one where I had just sat at the wrong end of the table eating soup. Raymond and Margaret Hartwell had refinanced this property 4 years ago. The lender of record, through 2 intermediary entities, was a real estate debt fund. That fund had been acquired by Crestline Capital 14 months ago. I owned their mortgage. I am not going to pretend I didn't feel something sharp and quiet when I confirmed that. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you've been holding a card for a long time without realizing it. I didn't do anything that weekend. I made coffee. I went for a run along the lakefront. I called my mother in Akron, who asked how the dinner was, and I said, fine, which is what I always say. Rowan came home Sunday afternoon looking wrung out, and we watched a movie and didn't talk about any of it because we had developed that particular skill in our marriage. Monday morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Diana, who has been with me since Crestline had 3 employees and operated out of a Wicker Park co-working space. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "How do you want to handle the notification?" "Formally," I said, "through proper channels, everything documented. Timeline. End of this week." Tuesday, Raymond Hartwell's attorney filed the trust amendment. I received a copy, forwarded by Rowan, with a note from his mother that said simply, "We think this is for the best." No explanation of what "this" referred to, as if I would understand, as if the message was clear, as if they were confident I would now make the quiet, graceful exit they had scripted for me. I forwarded the email to Diana without responding. Thursday, I asked Rowan to dinner, not his parents' house. A restaurant in the city we'd gone to on our second date, a small Italian place in River North where the tables are close together and the lighting is low. I wanted neutral ground. I wanted him to be able to look at me. He knew something was happening. He'd known since Saturday. He had the particular tension of a man who has been told to wait while a decision is made about his life by the people he can't say no to. We ordered and I looked at him across the table and I said, "I need to tell you something, several things." He nodded slowly. "Your family is moving against me," I said. "The trust restructuring, the dinner, the way I was seated, it's coordinated. They want me to feel like I have nowhere to stand, like I should take the hint and step back." "Naomi, I'm not angry at you," I said. "I want you to hear me say that first. But I need you to understand something about the situation before Thursday is over." I told him about Crestline, the real numbers, the real scope. I watched his face move through disbelief and then something like vertigo, the specific look of a person recalibrating. I told him about Millbrook Estates and the senior debt position. I told him about the Lake Forest mortgage. He was very quiet for a long time. "You own our mortgage," he said. "Not a question, just processing. My firm holds the debt, yes, through entities your father's attorney would have to look carefully to trace." "How long?" 14 months. He pressed his hands flat on the table. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know what kind of family I'd married into before I handed them leverage over my work. I needed to see who they were when they thought I had nothing." I paused. "Now I've seen." There was a long silence. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "That depends on you," I said. "On us. I need to know if you're in this marriage because you want to be or because you haven't found a way out that doesn't cost you money." He looked at me for a long time. I held his gaze and waited, because I had learned a long time ago that you can tell a great deal about a person's character by how they handle the moment when the script runs out. "I'm in this marriage," he said quietly, "because I love you. I've always been in it for that reason." I believed him. I believed him not naively, but because I had watched him carefully for 6 years and because I knew the difference, by then, between the truths people perform and the truths they confess at close range. Then we do this together, I said. Friday morning, Diana sent a formal letter to the Hartwell family attorney. The letter outlined Crestline Capital's position in the Millbrook Estates senior secured debt and noted that the project was currently in technical default due to a missed covenant tied to construction milestones. The letter requested a meeting within 10 business days to discuss resolution options, which could include restructured terms, a buyout of the debt position, or initiation of foreclosure proceedings. A separate letter, sent simultaneously to Raymond Hartwell personally, notified him that the servicer of his residential mortgage in Lake Forest had transferred administrative oversight to Crestline Capital as part of a portfolio acquisition, and that Mr. Peer, Hartwell should direct future inquiries to Crestline's asset management team. I was told later by Rowan, who heard from Bridget, that Raymond received the letters within an hour of each other. That he read them, set them on his desk, and sat very still for several minutes. That he then called his attorney, who confirmed that the entities were legitimate and the positions were real. That evening, Margaret called Rowan's cell. He put her on speaker because we had agreed he would. "She's trying to extort us," Margaret said. Her voice had the quality of someone who has never been checked and is encountering the experience for the first time. "This is a financial attack on this family." "Mom," Rowan said, "she's my wife. She built a company. She has legitimate business positions. That's not an attack. Why would she be in our mortgage? That's not normal. She didn't put herself there intentionally. She acquired a fund. It was in the fund." He paused. "Or if she did do it intentionally, then she's been watching this family the same way this family has been watching her." Silence on the line. "The trust amendment," Rowan said. "I need you to reverse it." "Rowan, I need you to reverse it," he said again, steady this time, with the tone of a person saying something they've practiced. "Naomi is my wife. She is not going anywhere. And if the choice is between my family and my marriage, I've made my decision." Margaret hung up. I looked at Rowan across our kitchen. He looked tired and also, under the tiredness, like a slightly different version of himself. Like a version that had made a choice. "Was that okay?" he asked. "That was exactly right," I said. The practical resolution took several weeks and involved more lawyers than I would have preferred. The trust amendment was reversed. The Millbrook debt was restructured on terms favorable to Crestline because it was a legitimate business negotiation, and Raymond, to his credit, understood when he was at a disadvantage. The Lake Forest mortgage continued to be serviced normally because I had no interest in foreclosing on anyone's home. That had never been the point. Raymond requested a meeting with me in December, just the two of us, at his office downtown. I went. He was 70 years old, and he had the bearing of a man who had always been the largest person in any room he entered. He sat across from me and looked at me for a while, the way people do when they're trying to see something they missed the first time. "You've been building this for a long time," he said. "Yes." "Without telling anyone in this family." "Correct." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because I needed to know what I was actually worth to the people in my life," I said. "Not my balance sheet. Me. And the only way to find that out was to make sure they didn't know about the balance sheet." He was quiet. Then he said, "That's a cold way to run a marriage." "It's a cold way to treat a daughter-in-law," I said. He didn't have an answer for that. Or if he did, he chose not to give it. We shook hands when I left. It wasn't warmth and it wasn't resolution. It was two people who understood each other now, which is a different thing, but sometimes it's enough. Margaret and I will never be easy with each other. I have accepted this. She sends birthday cards and is polite at family events, and I am polite back. And underneath that polite surface is a mutual awareness that we tested each other and both came away knowing exactly who the other person is. There is something almost respectful about that, in a cold way. Spencer ran Hartwell and Sons for 11 months before a combination of bad decisions and ignored counsel brought the company to a crisis point that required Raymond to come back in. The last time I heard, they were looking for an outside COO. No one has asked for my input on this. Rowan and I are still married. We are, if I'm honest. Better married than before, because now he knows everything, and I know everything, and we are not pretending anymore. There is a relief in that, a weight you didn't know you were carrying until the day you put it down. I think sometimes about that Tuesday invitation. The cream envelope, the careful handwriting, the implied instruction to dress accordingly. They sent it because they thought I had no ground to stand on. They thought the power was entirely theirs, the money, the family, the social architecture, the long weekend house with the right furniture and the right wine and the place cards arranged just so. What they didn't know was that I had spent 8 years building ground, quietly, methodically, not to win anything from them. I hadn't known them when I started, just because I had learned from a very young age that the only security that actually holds is the kind you build yourself. I showed up to that dinner in a 2-year-old navy dress and sat at the end of the table near the kitchen and ate butternut squash soup and let them think I was the person they'd decided I was. And then, when they moved against me, I showed them who I actually was. Not to humiliate them, not out of spite, just because they needed to know, and because I was done being underestimated by the people who were supposed to be my family. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm sitting at the far end of that table in Lake Forest, near the kitchen, eating butternut squash soup, while my mother-in-law watches me from across the room. She thinks she's already won. She thinks the place card, the trust amendment, the announcement about Spencer, she thinks all of it adds up to a message I'll quietly receive and act on. She thinks she knows exactly what I am and exactly what I'll do. She was wrong about both. What she didn't understand, what people like her rarely understand, is that the woman they dismiss is often the one who has been paying the closest attention. I had been watching that family for 6 years, watching how they valued people, how they used money as a substitute for love, how they built walls out of inherited status and called it character. I watched and I learned, and I kept building my own thing, quietly, without needing their approval or their acknowledgement. That discipline, the ability to work without external validation, to stay focused on what you're constructing even when the people around you don't see it. That is not a talent. It is a choice you make repeatedly, when it would be easier to stop. I think about what it cost me to stay quiet for 8 years about what I'd built. There were moments I wanted to say something. Dinners where a comment landed wrong, and I could have ended it with a single sentence. I didn't, not because I was planning revenge, but because I had learned early that the person who needs to prove themselves in every room hasn't yet found their footing. I had found mine. I didn't need them to see it to know it was real. But here is the thing about integrity. The real kind, not the performed kind, it eventually meets its test. And the test is never convenient. It comes at a family dinner, in a cream envelope, in a trust amendment filed on a Monday. It comes when the people who should have your back make a different calculation and decide you're expendable. The question isn't whether the test will come. It's whether you've built something solid enough to stand on when it does. Rowan had his own test that night at the restaurant. I want to be honest about that. He could have chosen differently. A lot of people in his position do. They choose the inheritance, the approval, the path of least resistance, and they dress it up as something more complicated than it is. He didn't. He looked at me across that table and said the true thing, the hard thing, the thing that cost him something. That took its own kind of strength, and I don't want to leave it out of this story. What Raymond and Margaret built their lives on. The assumption that money confers power over people, that love can be restructured like a trust, that a daughter-in-law with no family name is someone you can simply rearrange. That is a failure of moral reasoning, not a dramatic failure. A quiet, accumulated one. The kind that looks like sophistication from the inside and looks like something else entirely from where I was sitting. I didn't set out to teach them anything, but I think, maybe, the lesson landed anyway, that the people you underestimate are keeping their own records, building their own ground, waiting, not for revenge, but for the moment when the truth of things finally becomes undeniable. I've spent my whole life making myself impossible to erase. I'm not done yet.